One of the questions that people ask a lot when you're talking about getting on stage and public speaking and performance, and it comes to a dialogue, and you're talking about a story that, or you're telling a story that has multiple people speaking. One of the questions people ask is, well, how do you do it? Do you do a he said and then she said? Do you change your voice? Do you just get rid of the he said, she said? One of the tips that I have, especially if the conversation is critical to your main point, especially if you're going to leverage those viewpoints in that conversation for more than just the fact that two people were talking, is to use the physicality of your body as you present. So you might say, I have two friends that were fighting recently over whether or not to stay at a very expensive hotel. Was it worth it, right? You know, you spend $500 or you spend $50 and you still get four walls, a ceiling, a bathroom, and a bed, right? And then you'd say, now my one friend, Bill, right? He makes the case, and you shift your body to one side as you tell the story. And then you go, now my other friend, Sam, right? Her take was, and you tell the story, right? And you go, now back. Now, as you do that, you've created two physical spaces. So later, you can point to the space, right? To say, hey, right? If you're like Bill, and so now you shift from the story into your main point, your takeaway, why there are different segments, you know, in the world, and people may choose to spend more money or less. And you go, if you're like Bill, and you can point to where Bill fictitiously was standing because you physically moved your body in that space. And so you can say, if you're like Bill and point, right, you can physically move your body later. You go, if you're like Bill and you stand over here, and then you can walk over. Now, if you're like Sam and you can move over here. And what it does is it helps the audience visualize the fact that there are two sides to this discussion. Now, that's very different than if you're just telling a story about, and then he said, then I said, then she said, then I said, right? I'm talking about how you tell a story with multiple viewpoints and dialogue that holds that weight. If, on the other hand, you're simply talking about two or three people talking back and forth in the dialogue, you can say, right, he said and she said, or Bill said and Sam said, and be fine. You don't need to change your voice. You don't need to change, your pacing or anything else, right? You can just simply tell the story as if you were talking to one person. And maybe that's the most important thing to understand is when you're doing dialogue, right? And when you're on stage in general, you need to be comfortable, right? If physically moving your body is uncomfortable for you, you need to develop and practice that so that you get more comfortable. But ultimately, whatever you do when you're dealing with dialogue, right, make sure that you're staying comfortable in telling that story, or else it feels awkward, right? And that your tension bleeds out and your audience gets tense.